Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the Soviet Tier 7 medium tank, the A-44. This is usually where I'd give you a quick historical rundown of the machine, but I know nothing about this tank above and beyond what it tells you in the game, so I'm not going to bother. We're just going to get straight on with the in-game characteristics. 1100 hit points for a Tier 7 medium tank, it's about par for the course. I mean, what other Tier 7 medium tanks have I got to give you a comparison with? Let's see if I can find the Comet, for example. Well, we've got the Panther, but the Panther has quite a large slug of health at 1300. What about the Comet? There we go. Comet has 1150, so it's similar to the Comet. I mean, it's the same sort of ballpark figure, 1100, and it's more than the, I think it's 1050 you get with tanks like the T-34-1. So 1100 hit points is all right. It's a 38-ton tank that has a 600 horsepower engine, will do 59 kilometers an hour, or with a stated hull armor thickness at the front of 150 millimeters, which means this thing rams like an utter boss. It's very good at ramming people and will make them very sad if it connects. Obviously, take your targets with caution. I mean, if you see a Tiger II, don't ram it. It's bigger than you, heavier than you, has more armor than you, so you're just going to take more damage than it. But if you pick your targets carefully, this can be very good at ramming. Speaking of all those characteristics, 600 horsepower engine gives this thing a specific power of 15.5 horsepower per ton, which is okay for a medium tank. 59 kilometer an hour top speed is very healthy. At the traverse speed, stated is 44. As I keep mentioning in these reviews, that traverse speed is not necessarily the speed at which you will actually traverse, because that depends on your engine power, the ground resistances of the ground you're on, things like that. But the traverse speed of this tank is pretty good from experience. Turret traverse of 38 degrees a second again is pretty good. Now obviously you have a rear mounted turret, which makes this tank potentially quite awkward, and as you can see from the hull layout, there is not much space to depress the gun. Your gun depression is, I think it's 3 degrees. So all in all, that configuration can be quite awkward. The hull armor and the turret armor I will talk more about in a moment, but it is enough to get some bounces. I'll talk about the gun in just a minute as well. 370 meter view range is perfectly acceptable. 525 meter signal range is actually pretty poor. A lot of these mid-tier Soviet machines have kind of naff radios, but at least it's just about usable. Now let's talk about that gun. I'm only going to talk about the top gun. There's a bunch of other guns on this tank, but I'm only going to talk about the one that you want to be using, the moneymaker, the 107mm ZIS-6. This is the gun from the T-150 at Tier 6, the Soviet heavy tank. This is a heavy tank gun. 5.71 rate of fire, which actually, when you consider the alpha damage that I'll get onto in a second, is actually pretty good. It means the DPM for this machine is respectable. It's not the best, but it's respectable, especially considering it has good alpha damage. 167mm of penetration is slightly above average for a Tier 7 medium tank. 219 with APCR, again, yeah, that's nice for a Tier 7 medium. 300 alpha damage is the highest alpha damage of any Tier 7 medium tank. And it's a large caliber gun, it's a 107mm, so it has very nice HE rounds. Good news so far, these are the bad news. 0.45 dispersion at 100 meters and a 3.4 second aiming time. They are both terrible. This is a Soviet heavy tank gun. It feels like a Soviet heavy tank gun. This is basically a shotgun or a bit of wood with a nail in it, as far as weapons go. You tend to use it up close, personal, and batter people to death with it. That's kind of the deal with this weapon. It's a gun that is an acquired taste. It means that this tank doesn't really play like a medium tank a lot of the time. It's kind of a medium-heavy hybrid. It's a bit of an odd beast, but it can be a lot of fun. What about the grind on the machine in order to get up to that? Well, if you look at the Soviet medium tank line in general, where are we? A-44, there we go. You come from the ubiquitous T-34 that every Soviet line and its mother goes through. Then you get to the A-43 at Tier 6. I've got a full review of that tank if you're interested in it. It's kind of like the Soviet Cromwell. It's very good fun. Then you have the A-44 at Tier 7, which is a very different beastie. The stock gun on this tank is absolutely terrible. The 76mm F-34. It's basically the gun that you use on the Matilda 4, the Tier 5 premium with limited matchmaking. It's absolutely horrendous. But you should have both of these guns already unlocked from the T-34. They're both respectable. And indeed from the A-43, but they're looking rather tired now. You can already have the 107mm ZIS-6 unlocked from the T-150 if you've played that. However, it can't be mounted on the stock suspension, so you need to upgrade the suspension in order to put it on. The upgraded engine comes from the A-43 at Tier 6, the radio is used on a whole bunch of different machines, and of course you'll have to invest in the turret. So basically your stock configuration, providing you've already done your homework, is going to be stock suspension, fully upgraded engine, top radio, stock turret, and one of these guns. Now, you could burn some free XP on the top gun, but as I mentioned, you'd need to have the top suspension in order to mount it, or the enhanced suspension module. Now, if memory serves, what I did with this tank, because I already had this gun from the T-150, I either used the suspension module or put free experience into the top suspension. It's only about 8,000 of it. And then just play this straight away with the top 107mm gun. Top turret you can get sometime later. That's what I did with this tank, and I had a fine time doing that. The grind is not that painful, and certainly a little bit of free experience with this grind goes quite a long way, providing you've already played the T-150. But it's not the worst grind out there. So, equipment, crew skills, well, you can see I've moved my crew, so spoiler alert, I'm not keeping this tank, but I've moved my crew up to the Object 416. But, in terms of crew skills, Sixth Sense is your friend, Safe Stowage is your friend, you might want preventative maintenance because you do take a lot of engine damage, and so that can just reduce the chances of you getting set on fire because of that engine damage. Repairs, you want repairs. That is an incredibly important skill to have on this tank, and that's what you want to prioritise. Ammo loadout, you can see I've got 5 HE rounds. The HE rounds are pretty good. 5 APCR, I think I fired about 2 of them in my whole time using this tank. And then 50 armour-piercing rounds, which are your bread and butter. Your consumables, I went for the standard, small first aid kit, repair kit, and manual fire extinguisher. You might want to upgrade those to the premium versions. You could use Lend-Lease oil and whatnot, but I do think you probably need all of the consumables on this tank. Fire is a very real danger, and certainly the repair kit and the first aid kit, because you tend to use this as very much a frontline breakthrough tank. You take damage, and so you do want those to fill in the gaps. Equipment. Now, in my opinion, the gun is one of the most distinctive features on this tank, and so you want to make the best use of it you can. So I used a gun rammer, improved vents, and I used an enhanced gun laying drive, because you can't use a vertical stabilizer on this machine. The only tier 7s that get vert stabs are the Americans and the British. So just to try and make that aiming time a bit better, I used an enhanced gun laying drive. You could try and use optics or something instead, but I really felt with this machine you wanted to maximise the gun performance, and so I made my choices accordingly. Are there any other pieces you might want? Toolbox isn't a terrible idea, but I'm not sure I would take it over the other options. Filling tanks with CO2, you do sometimes get set on fire, so again that would be a viable option, but again you could probably squeeze more performance out of the machine if you didn't bother with that. Enhancement to engine durability. You have a frontal engine in this tank which gets knocked out a lot, so that is an option. But again, would you really take it over one of the options to get to improve your gun? I wouldn't, and indeed I didn't. Spore liner, I wouldn't bother. Torsion bars, if you want them to mount the top gun, yeah, sure, go for it. Apart from that, I wouldn't bother. Wet ammo rack, I wouldn't bother. Anything else? Camo net? Nah, you're going to be on the move too much. That's crew skills, that's equipment. Yeah, you just have to get used to the playstyle of this tank, which is very much in your face, as hopefully you're going to see in the gameplay. Anyway, let's go and have a quick look at the armor profile and various different critical module locations and whatnot. So just before I actually talk about the armor scheme, I would like to highlight that this thing gets 3 degrees of gun depression. 3. Those of you who've played some of the Chinese medium tanks with those large caliber guns might be used to this sort of level of gun depression, but you also have to bear in mind, combine this with the rear mounted turret and the A-44 really struggles with its flexibility. Anyway, onto the armour scheme. Now, rear, trashy. I say trashy, the rear of the turret is 92mm, you can actually get some bounces off of that, but the rear is nothing to really get too excited about. Side armour, 60mm at a pretty good angle. Sorry, at a pretty good angle, if you put on it a pretty good angle. Sorry. Then you can start getting some fairly nice effective armour values of around about 200mm in some places. Add in the tracks and you can bounce some shots. From the front, well, this is where you notice that the listed armour values aren't necessarily uniform. Turret is 90mm, and some of the angles on that 90mm mean that you can get some tough areas on the turret, but if you come over toward the gun, despite the fact there's a gun mountlet there, there's a large hole behind this because they had to, have a hole in the turret to put the gun in, and so this is all pretty weak. And it's fairly easy to penetrate with, tier 6 and 7 medium tanks. You've also got this commander's cupola. You do have to be a bit careful because there's these rings of thicker armour, these red rings, and if you get around the side, of course, it's more angled. So you do have to be a little bit careful. If you're going to shoot for this, you want to try and shoot for those regions that don't have that don't have those rings on. As for the front of the hull, well, you do have 150mm of frontal armour, but only in this strip and this strip. And the angling on these strips makes them actually a bit thicker than that. But most of the front of the hull is 75. With a good angle on it, I will grant you, it has a good angle. So if you put some angling on it yourself, you find that the lower front plate is around 100mm. It can be penetrated. You then have 200 of effective armour sort of thing, or 180 around about here. This is about 130, 140. That goes over 200 and that's an auto bounce zone. Unless they've got a gun of 90mm caliber or higher, and then they will overmatch that 30mm of armour. So the frontal armour on the A-44 is actually not as impressive as it at first looks when you just consider the numbers in the garage. And the key to making the armour on this tank work is 1. Move your tank. Keep your tank moving, don't keep it stationary any longer than possible, and 2. Side scrape everywhere. And hope that they don't know your turret is relatively weak, because the front of your hull is not actually that strong in the grand scheme of things. So, module locations. Yeah. From the front, you have this blue area here, which is where you've got the driver sitting basically, and then next to the driver you have engine. Yay! Hence, frontal shots can and will knock out your engine and make you a very sad panda indeed. From the side, well, as I say, you've got the driver sitting over here on the left-hand side of the hull. You've of course got the engine in the right-hand side of the hull, but you can still perfectly happily shoot that engine from the side. And you've obviously got a couple of crew members in the turret, like a commander, gunner, loader, and all that jazz. But the main side module, I guess, is that engine. Again, it does rather dominate things. From the rear, you have fuel tank. So right at the back, if you shoot it in the bum, you can set it on fire by taking out the fuel tank. Again, from the side, other side, you've got this engine here. You've got a crew member in the turret, and you have the ammo rack also in the turret, so that is another area you can shoot at and give your opponent a very bad day. From above, there's nothing particularly interesting, though obviously shots that land straight on this sort of engine deck thing are going to give your driver a bit of a headache. So let's go and move on to some gameplay. Now, I know usually when I do the gameplay for these reviews, I try and include one game where the tank is top tier and one game where the tank is bottom tier, to try and give you a fairly well-rounded opinion of how the tank performs. I'm going to do something slightly different in this. Both of these games are going to be when we're top tier. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the A-44 really is a machine that likes being top tier. I don't think in this particular case showing you a bottom tier game would really demonstrate much about the tank. I mean, I had a bottom tier game to show you, but it was very generic. It was very similar to a bottom tier game you might have in any old medium tank, really. There was nothing special about it. So instead, The second game is going to show you what you can do with this thing when it gets into its element. The first game is going to try and highlight some of the problems you have with this tank. So, Tier 7 game, as I mentioned, I'm in a dynamic platoon. This is not a platoon that I'd set up beforehand. We're here on Ruinberg. It's an encounter game, and so we've come up to the village here. Now, we have to be a little bit careful working with this village, because the village, the field on Ruinberg comes to a bit of a rise in the middle, where gun depression is your friend, and the A-44 doesn't really have any gun depression to use, so we do need to be a little bit careful. Being fairly aggressive here, the artillery just shuts down that T-34. I wanted to make sure that we had the village. So often, hello Mr. Tiger P, you just bounced on me and I hit you for 300. I do more alpha damage than you do. Even though I'm a medium tank and you're a heavy. So often on this map, you get a team and they don't go forward into the town aggressively enough, and it's just, you know, you lose this town, this village area, and once you've lost that, it can be very difficult to come back into the game. So at the moment, I'm just out trading a pair of German Tier 7s. One's a Panther, the other one's a Tiger P. Trying to use my armour, there we go, bounce the Panther, put another round into him, and here you can see the alpha damage, armour and DPM combination at work, which is very nice, and there we go, the Panther gets executed. Now I'm going to turn around to deal with the AMX-12T and the Tiger P. Again, side scraping around this corner, and Tiger P tracks me, that's fine. I take the shot without fully aiming because he just fired, so he's probably going to pull back, so I thought, why not? Trying to keep a lookout for that AMX-12T, and one or two of my team members have kind of vaguely come in this general direction. You'll notice we have a T-34-85, however, who is still at base. Maybe the guy didn't connect. No, he did connect. Maybe the guy's just a muppet. I don't know. Maybe he's AFK. Whatever. I'm asking for some help. Going for the shoulder shot on that Tiger P. No, I lie, I was actually going for the tracking shot there. Could have gone for the shoulder shot, and we successfully managed to track him. AMX-12T is trying to shoot me, but he's left it far too late to run away. Didn't do any damage at all, and there we go. The only damage I've actually taken so far has been from that Panther. Panthers can give you problems if they know what they're doing. And that shot takes out my engine, which is kind of irritating, so I use my repair kit to put the engine back in. You know, frontal transmission or frontal engine can be quite frustrating. And now, well, we're just trying to spot these tank destroyers. Again, side scraping around that wreck. I then drive around the wreck. Ooh, Cromwell. Can I shoot the Cromwell? Yes, I can. And ooh, high damage roll. Shave off almost half his health. This gun hits hard. Get tracked again, this time by the Jag Panther, and you can see how this works, you know, and there we go. I just got my engine damaged again. So, this is the point I wanted to make. Frontal engine on the A-44, it's an E25, that's annoying. Frontal engine, you have to side scrape around corners wherever you go. If you poke the nose out even a little bit, the armour on the front of your hull is not actually quite as good as advertised, as I've already discussed, and so you have to be incredibly careful. There's a very, very real chance they will shoot you, take out your engine, damage your track, and I've had plenty of people damage my track and take out my engine with one shot, which can be, as I'm sure you can readily imagine, very frustrating. So we've already used our repair kit on our engine, which means that our engine is dead. The scoreline is 9-5, and, you know, I mean, at this stage, if you look at the scoreline and whatnot, it's probably not a massive issue that we've taken a bit of a battering and our mobility is hampered. It mainly means that I'm not going to be able to clean up as effectively toward the end of the game. Now, you can still get yourself up to top speed with the help of a bit of a hill, as I'm doing here. I'm doing 50 kilometers an hour, but if I run into things or whatnot, my knackered engine is going to struggle to propel me any further forward. There's only 4 of them left at this stage. This is very much clean up on aisle 3, trying to get the kill on the FV, but the FV slightly straightens out his course just as I fire, gets eliminated by other people. and that's the game. So really my game was up in that village, and I just wanted to show you how often your engine gets damaged, your track can get taken out, and that can be really, really frustrating. Nonetheless, we were able to have a good game, and you also got to see the armour working against those tier 7 tanks. So that's given you a flavour for what the A-44 is like. So let's go and have a look at the results, and then I'll try and give you a more tasty flavour, shall we say, of this machine. So that was worth a first class, mastery, fire for effect, duelist, hand of god, bruiser, high caliber, and a steel wall, which was not too shabby. Top of my team, 2,500 damage, 1,041 base experience, 2 kills, and of course those 2 medals. 12 shots fired, 10 hits, 9 pens. For that damage count, only blocked 990 damage with our armour. Most of the guys who were shooting at us had pretty small pew-pew guns, and also a number of those shots were absorbed by the tracks, which of course doesn't count as damage blocked, but it's still damage mitigated. And travelled 1.4 kilometres, making a fairly healthy profit. Even without a premium account, that would have been a 19,000 credit profit. So a fairly nice game overall, but again, wanted to highlight the vulnerability of that frontal engine if you are not careful. So let's go and have a look at the second game now. Okay, here we are, on Sand River. Again, it's a tier 7 game. As I mentioned, both of these games are top tier. And this is an encounter game, and in this game, we're going to kind of play this a bit more like a heavy tank, I guess. The nice thing about being top tier with this machine is because you have good mobility, a pretty punchy gun, a very punchy gun, and respectable armour, it means that you can use this machine very much like a bit of a battering ram. And it's a battering ram that people, you know, light tanks, medium tanks, whatever, they can't run away from. And of course, you can play peekaboo with people, and every time you play peekaboo with them, they hit you for something or other, and you hit them for, on average, 300, which is quite a lot at tier 7. In fact, in order to get more damage per shot than that, at tier 7, you either have to go to the, this is assuming you're using regular armor-piercing ammo, of course, you either have to go to the tank destroyers / artillery, or alternatively, you end up having to go to the Soviet 122mm guns. Apart from that, I think this is the highest alpha damage of the tier 7, and there's our first victim, VK3001P. Now, I have gone considerably further forward here than the rest of my team, side-scraping around this rock and trying to get some shots on the enemies. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful when you side-scrape. Your turret, as I mentioned, is relatively weak. So if people shoot you in the turret, you're likely to take damage. I was kind of surprised that shot penetrated there. The angling on the Sherman's hull is usually good for deflecting about 150mm of penetration, and because he was at a bit of an angle, I was expecting my 167mm of penetration to bounce off, but as it is, it went through. Tiger here, and the thing is, in this position, I can just out-trade these guys all day. Sure, there are lots of them, and they can reload faster and whatever, and all that jazz, and I'm going to miss some shots, but as long as I prioritise not taking damage myself, as I say, I can just out-trade these guys all day long. There we go, straightened out the armour to stop the AMX-12T having a better angle on my side, and rinse and repeat. And this is kind of heavy tank gameplay, and when you're top tier, a lot of the time, this is kind of your bread and butter gameplay for the A-44. Alas, that shot failed miserably to penetrate. Tiger 1 has had enough of my shenanigans. He's coming for me. Leave him on low health, trying to bounce any shot he might fire. He doesn't fire a single shot, and the Cromwell wrecks him. Not quite sure what that guy's plan was, but whatever it was, I don't think it worked. Other Tiger here, trying to pick out a shot that should penetrate. There we go. 279 was a low roll. It's not often that you say that about a medium tank, especially not at the mid-tiers. He returns fire, takes my track out, and my shot misses. Yeah, the gun's a bit derpy. You just have to deal with it. And it looks like he's going to perma-track me here, which is fine. It's not like I've got anything better to be doing than sitting here getting shot at anyway. And here's the armour on the A-44 really coming to the fore. Trying to get a shot on this Tiger 1, but it looks like actually the corner, this hitbox might be a bit bugged, because I don't appear to be hitting him. KV-1, however, has given me a much nicer shot, and we roll high on the KV-1, and I managed to get my tracks back on. Hoorah! KV-1's going to have a right pain of a time trying to penetrate me. He only blows my tracks off, and I shave off another chunk of his health, leaving him on 6. So there we go. Now, despite all this damage that I'm doing, I haven't actually got a kill, and the scoreline is actually even. You'll also notice from the map that all of our heavy tanks have decided that what they really need to be doing is camping at the back of the map. No, don't ask me why. Now, I took damage there as soon as I didn't side scrape around a corner, and suddenly the enemy were able to hit me, penetrate me, and take off quite a lot of health. Now, one of those shots was from the Tiger, but he only does 240 alpha, so I also took a hit from someone else. And now the Tiger started shooting my turret, and now they're behind me as well, and this is looking a little ugly. Okay, so let's ignore the people I was shooting at for now. Turn my attention to these guys who've got behind me, and managed to shave off quite a large chunk of my health. Put a shot into the Cheeto, moving him to the one-shot range. Jumbo flubs his shot, and against the penetration on the Jumbo, I should be okay poking the front of my tank out. I didn't really want to faff around to side scrape against that guy because it takes time, and I've got a KV-3, a KV-1 and a Tiger potentially coming up behind me. Cheeto takes out my engine, and I've used my repair kit, so my engine is now out of action. Again, second replay where I've lost my engine, and the Tiger finishes me off, which is a little bit sad. So in the end, despite the damage I was putting out, despite the kills I was making, I was undone by the fact that the heavy tanks on our team, who I was expecting to follow up behind me, you know, tanks such as the Tiger, the ARL, the AMX, etc. The heavy tanks on our team have decided that what they really need to be doing is camping, camping, camping some more. Which is kind of a little suboptimal. And you can see that is my opinion in the chat. And of course that weird hitbox on the terrain which denied me some shots against the Tiger 1. So as it is, eventually the heavy tanks on our team got stuck in and we were actually able to pull a win out of the bag on that game. So that was enough for another first class mastery, duelist, fire for effect, bruiser. I think that's cool-headed. And a high caliber. We would have had a steel wall if we'd survived, but alas, we didn't. 3,252 damage done. 3 kills, 1,162 base experience. Happily finishing top of our team. 18 shots fired, 14 hits, 12 pens for that damage count. We also blocked 2,425 damage with our armor. Of course, that does not count the shots that just blew our tracks off. So we absorbed a lot of incoming fire and dealt out a lot of damage, making a fairly nice profit in the process and coming away with a lot of experience. So that was showing you kind of how brutal the A-44 can be, but again you saw the engine get taken out, and in that particular case I only came unstuck because my support just wasn't there. Anyway, let's go and finish things off in the garage. So, final verdict. Well, as I already mentioned earlier on in this review, I'm not keeping this tank. It's a very distinctive machine. It definitely has a lot of personality, but it's also very awkward. When it works, it really works, and when it doesn't, it really doesn't, if that makes sense. It's not a tank of middle ground, it's a tank of extremes. And so that means it's not very flexible, and it can be quite frustrating to use. And so whether you like this or not is probably going to come down to whether you can get along with that derpy gun, terrible gun depression and rear mounted turret. I could make them work, but that doesn't mean that given the choice I would choose to play this tank over a Panther or a Comet. I would rather play one of those two. But it's still a very decent machine, and I far preferred this to the T-43, another Tier 7 American medium tank. So I guess that's my opinion of this machine. It's awkward, it can be frustrating, but it's also full of a lot of character and has a lot of potential if you can harness that potential, and can be a lot of fun. I'm not keeping it, but I think it's definitely worth a go. It's a big departure from the Tier 6, which is much more of a traditional medium tank, and it's nothing like the Tier 8, which is more like a tank destroyer. It's a very individual machine. It's not really like anything else I've played in this game. The other tank I guess I could compare it with the most is the VK3002D, in as much as they have a bit of armor, they're still fairly mobile. They can brutalize you if they can use that armor. But there are a lot of differences, and, well, as I say, it's just quite a unique tank, really. Anyway, I do recommend you go out and try it, even if you decide that you don't actually want to keep it, as the situation I'm in, but I do recommend you go and give it a go. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that review, maybe found it informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos, and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.